chapter 5 deals with the altered state of consciousness. There's kind of two sides to this, I would say. There's the biological side, and in a sense, I would say the chapter focuses a little too much on that, and maybe I'm not as interested just because I'm not, a medical doctor, and I don't necessarily understand some of the medical principles, physiological principles behind it. I mean, these are very important, and anyone who studies like addiction studies gets into this very intensely because it's so important to understand it. But obviously, if you have a disturbed sense of time, if you have hallucinations, if your body changes, that can have an immediate impact, right, on how you handle something. And so the thought is, because you're in a different state, that allows you to have that oneness, right, that connection to the divine. Now again, a non-religious person, an atheist might say, well, it's really a physiological thing going on, and we're interpreting it as a state of connection with the divine, that state of oneness, that unitary principle that we sometimes talk about. So I think this gets interesting when you start to connect the biological, the physiological, to more conceptual kind of things. And certainly you could say in many Native American societies, there's a famous study of the Mandan, the Native American group, and they would do these rituals, not unlike this, which was, I guess, 50 Shades of Grey inspired thing, where they would, hang themselves by meat hooks and then experience incredible pain for a period of time, and then over that period of time, they would enter an altered state, right? And so obviously things like fasting, taking drugs, pain could also have this impact. And there have been, more than one text that have been written on the topic of sacred pain and how it gets used. And it seems to me it's a little different how it gets used there, or like an S&M subculture, sadomasochistic subculture. It's going to have a different purpose and approach, but all the same in terms of using the body, right? Using the body as a site of alteration. And probably the 50 Shades of Grey stuff, like we talked about with the vampires, it's really not, right, as radical as they, and I think it allows like older people to feel that they're radical when they read it, right? Same thing with the Twilight series. Did I just offend people who love reading 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight? I don't know if you do that. It's fine if you do, it's all entertainment, but I don't think it's like a radical exploration of like sexuality or anything like that. But baby steps, right, is maybe how our society has to move in terms of looking at some of these issues. Again, the biological basis of the altered state, I think this question is a key one. Medical condition and mystical experience, or could it be both, right? Same thing like near-death experiences. People talk about seeing lights, or talking about UFOs and encounters with alien beings or paranormal activities. It could be the same thing, right? If you're in any place and something happens that's uncanny, something strange you can't explain, a sound or a voice or some sort of vision you see, could that be related to an altered state? Could it be an actual mystical experience? Some of this is, I remember when I was younger, I'd do like these long road trips, and after a while, I'd be on the road for too long, and I'm downing like caffeine and Jolt and stuff, trying to stay awake, which isn't safe. I'm not encouraging that. But after a while, it's like I'd start to see things, right? Particularly driving at night. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I was experiencing mystical things on the road or whatever, but you're tired and your body has that, it has an effect on you. It has an effect on how you think, and that's why, if you're doing anything that involves danger, like flying a plane or operating heavy machinery, you want to be rested and stuff for obvious reasons, because that's going to affect your reaction time and everything else. But that divide between the mystical and the medical, the physiological and the divine, I think is a classic one here that probably, when you analyze this, it probably gives you a sense of how you're looking at it in terms of more the religious side versus more the medical, physiological side. So I gave you this last time, I think I gave you a different one. I can't remember. I gave you a handout. There are a couple handouts front and back there. I think I gave you this context in there too. So what I'm trying to suggest is that, beyond the biological, we can talk about certain social contexts, how altered states allow rituals to take place, why that's important. Sometimes this can be individualistic, and to your question earlier, I said, how can you then get, in the model of a psychedelic society, individuals to tie into the collective and to create that communal sense, that communities that Victor Turner talks about, the liminality, in order to achieve change. That's, I think, always the key in that social context. In terms of loss, the effect on the individual, again, whether it's a sense of oneness or a loss of control, this can be quite important. And I think what McKenna was getting at is that if more people experience an altered state, it puts them in a place where they can throw their ego behind, their sense of self, their sense of this is how things should be, and you have more of a liminal or liminal space that everyone experiences, and based on that equality, at least in theory, you could then achieve the ritual, go through the ritual. If you're creating the model of the next society, you could do the same thing because everybody's more like this instead of hierarchical top-down kind of thing. And then again, the philosophical issues, creativity, freedom from the constraints of society. Again, I think this is the 60s spirit. This is even more, I mean, McKenna talked about it more, Tim Leary, saying like, society is a joke, everything is just, taking us to war in Vietnam, the media wants us to be consumers, the government, hates certain groups in society, so here's one way to, tune out, right? You could, take drugs, pop a pill, and you could sort of forget about all this. It allows you to leave the constraints of society. Now, again, that doesn't always work, and again, people have addictions and people have challenges, so it's probably as idealistic as it gets, it seems to me, and that's, I think, again, the problem with McKenna's psychedelic society is that not everybody, if you're not politically inclined, if you're not inclined on at least a few areas, as we talked about, a few things that you care about in terms of social justice issues, what difference is taking a pill going to make to all of a sudden, I mean, maybe you could take the pill that gives you a political consciousness. That would be cool, right? You take that pill, it's some kind of weird green pill, and all of a sudden you take it and you're like, now I care about the world. I don't care about the Kardashians. I want to go out and I want to challenge the social order. I want to challenge government. I want to get involved. I want to do community consciousness raising just because you took a magic pill or something, right? It's not going to happen. That's not going to happen just by dropping out and taking a pill, as McKenna and Larry talked about. So the idealism here, I feel like it's a bit of a challenge because it's not going to be as easy. If it sounds easy, it's certainly not that easy. So again, the biological stuff I think is interesting. Rhythm certainly is part of this, and I found at least an article here that talked about a parallel here, and I always like these parallels that people make because I think there are some things that are shared in common, and this is why, like with Victor Turner, he created that word liminoid to maybe parallel liminal experiences of religion and ritual with non-religious contexts that could happen, like even in a shopping mall or something like this, if you can have a liminoid experience. So likewise, this was saying like there are shamanic principles that are part of rave culture, maybe in terms of drugs, in terms of altered states, in terms of people connecting with something they enjoy, rhythm and movement and so forth. Again, the book talks about the sympathetic structure of the brain and the orientation structure. So if you mess with those, if you disorient yourself, you could then more fully connect with others. Group experiences, like they show here in the case of a rave, would be an example of an opportunity for people to leave their bodies and to connect more with the unity, maybe not of a higher power, but the unity of a crowd. And there was just an article I need to look at. It came across when I was researching something else, and it was a criticism of EDM and dubstep culture, and like Snow Globe, and talking about how it's a problem. And I didn't get a chance to read it yet, but who knows? It might be some sort of moralism kind of argument. But there's a lot of value, I think, to crowds and crowds giving us opportunities, whether in a religious or non-religious sense, to escape the self. Again, you get heavy emphasis in the chapter on the physiological stuff, and it's probably the fact that was their interest, I guess. So I don't know, where would you leave the altered state as far as a topic? Have your views changed on altered states anymore? If in the past you saw the altered state as just an excuse to get high, I mean, do you have a different, more political sense? Do you think it depends on the context? What are your views?
It depends if you're going on like a journey or something.
Okay.
If you have a goal in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a pilgrimage, right? Could be an example of this. If you have a goal to explore new sides of yourself, to try to connect to new experiences, and again, a lot of people in the art world have experimented with this, then that could be an opportunity to do something, right? That's a lot different than just saying, I want to do this to get high. And again, entertainment is a possibility, but if that's all you do, then that's probably a severe limitation on growth of the self. Scott?
Well, I think most of the time there's an almost direct correlation between like how often someone does these
Yeah,
laws
yeah.
and stuff, and the meaning we get out of them.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and the meaning, right? Like again, if the meaning is maybe only euphoria, although you could say, euphoria is important, right? I mean, we live in a society where issues like depression and people are sad, and so how do you pick yourself up? And that could be one opportunity. I just saw that. What state? Ohio yesterday. There were some votes on different referenda. Ohio voted down medical marijuana, I think, which Nevada is coming up next year. So again, it'd be interesting to see, like, I actually thought, I don't know, Ohio's, I think, a fairly conservative state, except some of the big cities, but I actually thought that probably would pass because you get this curious thing going on in our society where some of the left political groups and the right, and I'm specifically thinking of some of the left groups and say the libertarians, you can say libertarians are kind of on the right, but it's a strange phenomenon because they're very much, government off my, government out of my, personal experiences or personal rights. Like, I want my own liberties, I don't want government to interfere with me. So I actually thought that Ohio maybe might vote that in favor, and they didn't. So that's an interesting one in terms of whether that continues. We'll see what happens with Nevada next year.
Well, what I think about libertarians, and like Ohio's a lot of them are libertarians,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like socially left and economically right.
Economically right, yeah, I think you're right on that.
That's why
Yeah.
this is, a lot of the issues are economic. That's why we think of it as
Mhm.
towards the right. But
Yeah,
actually, since they're just like hands off, government hands off,
Yeah,
that puts them in the left on a lot
yeah,
of
yeah.
social issues.
Yeah, and my fear has always been, and this is probably a generalization of libertarian politics, that it could lead you too much to individuality. Because some people I know are libertarians. They say, oh well, as long as I can have a gun and I can have my rights, and I don't want the government telling me what I can do or not do in my bedroom, drugs, et cetera, that's fine. But then that connection to the social level, if you only are doing that for your own, almost like Ayn Rand, right? Her stuff, on capitalism, and that was, about the achievement of the individual, and everything's focused on the individual achieving his or her experiences and opportunities. Talk about transcendentalism, but I always thought that with Thoreau and Emerson and the American Transcendentalists, it could lead you maybe, I don't know, to a political order, some kind of communal spirit. If it's just a project of the self, then what's the point? But I would say, what's the point? Again, some wouldn't. Now, interestingly enough, some of the even mainstream religions, some Judeo-Christian traditions, are moving in this direction, where you can go to a service on Sunday and they don't even mention God, they don't mention Christ, and instead it's about improving the self. Here's how you can be a better father, a better mother. Here's how you can be more active with your kids and be responsible and have a healthy diet, healthy living. And it seems to me like that's a curious shift because religion traditionally has been about the group and the congregation and that integration of self into the larger fabric. But if we're moving more towards the individual experience, again, I would say that may be great for me and you as individuals, but it's not going to bode well, I think, for society and for the collective. So yeah, I agree with the points both of you made. It does depend on, I think, how we think about this as individuals.
After doing this past week on altered states, my view on it has actually broadened. Like, now I see meditation as a form of altered state.
For sure.
Or like when we wake up and we feel lazy, that's our normal mental state for the day, but we push ourselves, we go in the gym and we exercise. We just created an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah. And sometimes it's interesting just, leading your life and thinking about the day and, everything that you have to do, and then different ways that we all, like whether it's caffeine or other things that we use, right, to wake up and to do that thing we have to do. Some people would say, to go back to the communal models, that we're living a life where we're primarily working and we're not doing things for fun anymore, and that if you look at some of the hunter-gatherer groups, particularly there was a study done in Congo in southern Africa by Marshall Solins, the anthropologist, and he said they're the model that we should all be following in terms of affluence. They were hunter-gatherers. They worked, and they worked hard, but for short periods of time, and they stored everything that they hunted and gathered, and then they had a ton of time for leisure and relaxation. He said, they produce much and they desire little. So it's a model not of accumulation and wealth and saying, man, I'm going to work, 3 jobs until I have the Hummer and I have the expensive condo and I can fly first class, and people will look at me and say, man, you have a Breitling watch and you've got all the bling in your body and you're something. That's not the model. It's the model that we should follow for affluence has nothing to do with accumulation. It has to do with just being in control of your life, being able to take charge of your life and to have a lot of free time and to not have to work yourself into the ground. It seems like in the States, as say compared to Europe and some other places, it's all about how much more can we work and how much less will our employers pay us. And then the excuse is you have to work more time over time because you're not making a salary that's commensurate with the cost of living. And I think it's one of the biggest scams of the United States, frankly, say, oh, let's just work all the time. And then our life expectancy, our stress levels are out of control. So, and that would be a reason to have an altered state, right? To just get yourself out of this attitude of just working. So anyway, the models, again, we talked about this last time. What I'm suggesting is that when you get into an altered state or a shamanic model, you're moving, I think, more towards the individualistic experience, at least with the divine. Not to say that this is the only experience or that it's the best one, because again, with the example of libertarians, if you're only operating at the level of the individual, how do you ever achieve social change? How do you create a collective experience out there? How do you create a collective consciousness? So I would say there could be real good models, and again, some of the stuff happening in Judeo-Christian traditions, but I don't know how to say it, a little funkier version of that, a twist onto some things, trying to get people to be more honest or to not be so condemning of certain lifestyles. You could have a priest who's involved in this kind of practice and in this model and connecting with everyday people, specifically because the congregation accepts what they're saying, and they don't feel like that their purpose is to condemn them. Again, in the Catholic Church, there's always been, I think, this strict hierarchy, and it's sometimes hard, and you can feel, some of us who are brought up Catholic, I think maybe we felt later in life alienated because it was all about the hierarchy and the condemnation, and not enough and less about some other issues, or re-envisioning understandings of some of these values, as we talked about value statements earlier, in such a way that it seems much more like this. Again, we're talking about the vertical versus the lateral. I'm suggesting that in these models, particularly in this one, right, the shaman, the shaman I knew in college, he was charismatic, but he just had a spirit to him and an ease in terms of his charisma and how he moved and interacted with people, and he was never about condemning and acting in this very even in a manner of being like an authority figure or someone to follow. And so that's a different approach, I think, than what we maybe see in some of the traditional religions. But hopefully that's changing over time. I think the Pope, has been doing some interesting things, swaying on some political issues lately, but different maybe in terms of how we come to expect a Pope acting. So we'll do now, and I'll just frame this a little bit, and then we'll take our break, and I want to show you some of this film Mono, which is, I think, pretty interesting. And then after that, we can talk about if you've had any experiences, any objects or places or people that you think are charged with